Hi, I'm Rigger, this is You Alright, and today we're going to have a little chat about a realization I recently had that answered a burning little question that's been floating around for a few volumes now. But before we get started, be sure to please like it if you like it, share it if you think others would like it too, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and of course subscribe if you want to see more from me. I'll be honest, when I was constructing this video I was wondering whether to give you the answer like right away of what we're looking for, or leave it till the end and sort of build up to it. But the reveal isn't actually really earth-shattering. Half of you probably already put it together from the thumbnail maybe just by thinking it over, because it all clicks pretty simply, which is why I think it makes so much sense. Because of that, I'll just give you the answer up front, and I'll give you my evidence and reasoning as we go if you still need convincing. But stick around because I promise there'll be some chats about what this all could mean, and maybe a little story. But basically, I think it seems to be pretty clear, or simple and obvious at this point, that after what we've seen, Hazel and Raven have met before. And Hazel is how Raven got her information on Salem that scared her so much. Stick with me and we'll cover all the details. Now, to start off, there's been a few theories on how Raven knows what she knows. Lots of people assume she asked the lamp, which, no, it doesn't line up at all, I'm sorry. The timeline is off, the behavior is off, it just doesn't really work. But I'll address it so we're all on an even playing field here. First up, the timeline. It is unclear exactly the Team Stark timeline, but you can use Yang as a jumping off point to try and work it out. Yang, when we meet her, is 17. Raven left Stark, Ty, and Yang just after she was born. No one had seen her since, is how Yang puts it. Probably not entirely true, but that's where the split occurred. Lionheart states that Spring ran away over a decade ago. Now 17 years is more than a decade, but it's very strange to say over a decade if it was over 15 years ago, and even approaching 20 if it was 17. Also, Crow has had no idea until recently that she was picked up by Raven, that being Spring, which she could hide from him, sure, but timeline-wise it'd make more sense that she did that after splitting from her team in Oz, especially since she would be leading the tribe then. Makes all the sense. Thus making it easy to conclude that Raven left Team Stark, went back to her tribe, spent time there, then found the Spring Maiden, then received the Spring Maiden's powers. This is important. And next up for evidence, you can actually look at Vanal. Sure, she is a decoy. She would, of course, not trick someone who knew actual Spring. However, in general, she should line up with Spring to be plausible if anyone found out any info about her. So the age should be similar if Raven is any good at this. By all accounts, we're told she is. So Vanal's age has not been revealed anywhere I can find, but looking at her and using her voice, she's probably somewhere in her early or mid-20s, maybe 25. Taking that info and backing it up over a decade ago, when Spring ran away, would place her at about 15 or 16. Makes sense, as Leo described her initial enthusiasm at inheriting her powers, meaning Leo was in on it, or at least was made quickly aware once the powers were sent to her. And getting them as a young woman fits everything we've heard so far. It is unlikely they went to whoever Spring was as an actual child. Sure, I don't know if it's impossible or not, but given all the evidence stated so far, it's unlikely. Also, this means Raven never had to hide her powers from Team Stark, because she never had them until after she left. Everything lines up. There's simply the evidence of events at Haven. Raven didn't know how the vault worked. She'd have to have opened it to have used the lamp. You can say that it was a ploy, but even after everyone is presumed dead, she's still unsure in investigating how this all works. Even if she smuggled previous Spring in, she'd somehow have to know how to use the vault, and she doesn't. Nothing adds up about it, and there is no reason why, let's say, Oz would have taken previous Spring down to the vault, taken the lamp out, given it to Raven, told her how to use it, let her ask a question, especially about Salem, and then put it all back. None of that makes any sense. Honestly, as much as people like to speculate about the missing question, it's most likely it was just used by Ozpin in the past. He's probably asked her dozens of things over the years. It's the benefits of reincarnation. And you might say, well, why put it there? It's so, in plot-wise, that Team RWBY have left questions to use in the plot. It makes things harder for them. It's a writing thing. You're supposed to get 3 questions, but you don't get 3. You only get 2, and then you used 1, so now there's 1 left. People can fight over the 1, it works for storytelling. So, Yang's age, Vanal's age, Raven's behavior, the lore so far, the circumstances, and the logic all say Raven didn't ask the lamp about Salem. So we'll rule out that one. Now, the only other real explanations I've seen that are like super plot relevant other than Raven just gathered info from randoms, which why would randoms know, same thing. The only other explanation I've really seen wades deeply into fanfic territory, and it's mostly all around Summer. It's mostly people wanting to come up with a Summer Rose story. Things like that Raven went with her on her mission to Salem, saw Summer die and saw that Salem was invincible and fled, using her portals perhaps. Or a variant of such a scenario. Okay, we can just run off if you choose to want to believe that or not. I can't disprove it. I can say it seems really unlikely given everything. Raven is spiteful about trusting Oz, sure, and she doesn't seem to like Summer, which could more be related to Ty and just inner workings of their team. But I don't know if accompanying her on an unknown suicide mission and being forced to flee equates to Raven's behavior. Some like to point to the evidence of Raven also drinking as guilt over this, or apparently that she killed Summer in some versions. I really don't see it. Drinking because you're anxious, scared, depressed over Salem's existence, what it means for everyone, secretly holding the powers that an evil, unstoppable force would want, hating your own past, and leading a tribe of people as well, is enough to suffice my question of her drinking and her mental state. Not to mention, it might run in the family just a little. Coping mechanisms don't need to equate to horrific betrayals of murder. If you're not satisfied by that, I can't stop you from feeling how you feel, but I'm just going to move past them. Most of those are really about Summer anyway. So, next up, we need to look at Hazel. Now, Hazel is a hot mess of a character, but this idea only came to me and came to light in the last episode that we saw, Chapter 7 of Volume 8, War, when Hazel snaps about how unstoppable Salem is. He says he killed her over and over again, and she just kept coming back until it convinced him that she was unstoppable, and offered him a path of vengeance to Oz instead. So, we know that Hazel and Gretchen were twins. She enrolled at Beacon and died on a training mission, so we know her age range was about 17 to 21, probably on the lower end of that. That puts Hazel's age at about the same when she died. Now, trying to assume Hazel's age isn't really that easy. He's absolutely a fully grown man, putting him anywhere through his 30s through to his late 40s is fair. Getting past 50 might be a stretch. And really that's only because we don't see things like grey in his hair, which you could easily say that he dyes and covers up if you want. His physical form is not a good indicator because he's clearly incredibly athletic and in fighting condition and has maintained that his whole life, so it doesn't give away his age. So for a theoretical timeline, this math works out for you. Raven has known about Salem for at least 17 years at the start of the series. If Gretchen died at say 18, then put 5 years on it for Hazel to stew on his hate for a bit and then Salem to find him, making him 23. Put another 3 years on it for him working for Salem as a minion before this encounter with Raven, that puts him at about 26. Then slap Yang 17 years on top of it, that makes Hazel about 43 at the series start. That seems about right. And also, I'm obviously playing pretty generous with those random years I'm adding, putting him in his 20s before he met Salem and having him work for her for several years before this Raven thing I'm going to discuss is just a guess. If you want to trim that down, you could say Gretchen died at 17. Hazel met Salem in the same year. You could whittle down these years quite a lot, making Hazel in his mid-30s if you preferred. There's absolutely a lot of wiggle room in this timeline even. There's a lot that keeps it working no matter what ages you choose to prefer. I simply spaced it out so it felt more natural and less rushed as a progressive story, since it's not something we're actually seeing on screen where you'd want it all condensed and working together without time jumps. But the point is, just know that if your issue is his age in this theory, it can be trimmed down quite a fair bit and still make it work, or even pushed upwards if you'd like. The other reason I'm inflating a few years is because of the Gretchen incident. It makes more sense to me and works better if the Gretchen incident is something that happens before Team Stark arrive at Beacon rather than something that happens while they're there. With the few inflated years, it'd mean it happened a year or two before they arrive. If you'd like to group these things together, you can, but given how Raven and Crow acted with Hazel around, it'd make more sense to have been something they weren't around for when it initially happened, having no personal connection to it at all, even being around the school when this student died. I'm getting ahead of myself slightly, but I hope that sort of makes sense. If you were doing the Team Stark story and you wanted to spice it up, you might write Gretchen's incident into there. But given the timeline we've been given and how things go, it would make more sense if Team Stark simply weren't there for that event and came slightly later. However, if you're completely against it, it still doesn't break things for it to have happened while they're there. Now, the other thing we need to look at is Hazel's personality. He isn't totally unreasonable most of the time. He talks a fair bit and he's not ruthless in general. Now, it's true that this is him in a theoretical 40s plus, and he's probably cooled off a lot in general, aside from things concerning Oz and Gretchen, of course. With age comes temperament and wisdom, even for bad guys. So he may be more aggressive and less conversational when he was younger, but given how he talks about himself and meeting Salem the first time, it seems he got humble and very scared very early on by her, and no doubt that'd also cool him off and keep him in check in general, even at a young age. If you take that reasoning and you compare it to his modern day personality, I think that means it's pretty fair to say he'd still be a talkative and reasonable person for the most part, even under Salem when he was younger. I don't think that's an unfair position to take, that his personality has remained somewhat consistent over time rather than some more radical change. And that just establishes who the Hazel we might meet in this past scenario is. We see in the episode War, it actually doesn't take much probing for Hazel to talk about Salem. Now sure, he's with Oz, and that's a charged situation, but my point is Hazel doesn't seem to hold sort of a loyalty or refusal to talk about Salem to the point of refusing to discuss his past and his interactions with her. Or at least to a degree. And on top of that, Hazel's dislike for unnecessary death and vendetta against Oz and the Huntsman, and this whole scenario seems to line up pretty logically, actually. So we've talked about who Raven and Hazel are. Lastly, we need to talk about how this all could come to be. Where is my evidence? Also, I've mentioned the timeline a lot, so how does this all line up? Well, if we take everyone's statements so far as true, and you take Gretchen's death a year or so before Stark shows up, then Stark completes their time at Beacon, all 4 years, as Crow says they do graduate, so they're in their early 20s, probably all about 2021. Then just say perhaps they do jobs for Oz for maybe 2 years or so before this incident. Raven and Crow get their bird powers to be his eyes around the world, once they graduate becoming more, lone operatives for him and being part of his inner circle and being told about Salem and everything. That would mean that now Hazel has been working for Salem anywhere from 2 to 7 years, depending where you prefer. Take your pick depending on his age and when you thought he was found after Gretchen. Now, I'd say that Oz would be aware of Hazel and probably has told his inner circle and team to be wary of this person. Perhaps he's had a run-in with Oz personally, or maybe not. Oz doesn't know or doesn't say Hazel's ability or fighting style or any of that, simply that this person has a vendetta against him and is under the influence of Salem, so be careful if you see him. Simple as that. Remember, the team were told about Salem, but no one knows the immortal part. This would all place Raven at about 23. For convenience, and actually for an important plot point, we'll say Raven is in the very early stages of pregnancy here. Yes, doing missions like that is a terrible idea. But yes, Raven pushes those ideas to the back of her mind as if it's a problem that she hopes will go away for now. She's kinda strong-headed if you didn't notice. And when I say early stages, I mean she isn't showing or anything, like she's literally recently found this out. And at this point, she accepts or requests to go on a solo secret mission for Oz. There were a lot of those back in the day, if you remember. A secret mission. She flies off to, let's say, Mistral. It can be anywhere, but we'll say it's Mistral. Why not? Raven can say she's a good pick for it because she knows Mistral given that she grew up with the bandits there. We know Hazel has travelled through Mistral before. I'm sure that Salem's agents go everywhere, but you get my point. We'll just put him there. Doesn't really matter. Pretty much so long as it's just outside of Beacon, which is fair. Now, while on this job, Raven encounters Hazel. Now you might ask what he's doing. I don't know. Whatever Salem was up to before the story began. Gather the Spring Maiden info, hunting down silver-eyed people, forming an alliance with somebody, I don't know. Whatever it is that Salem does. What I would actually assume it would be is an event something like a big lead on perhaps one of the maidens, like a weird thing happening in a town near Mistral, and that actually is what sparked Raven as well as Oz. That's what the mission is, go investigate this thing. Oz sends Raven, Salem sends Hazel, they both go to check out this anomaly that, appeared through the news sort of thing, or travelled on the grapevine, those sort of things. What it actually was is probably nothing, probably a false alarm. Happens all the time, right? Stories in the night. Or it was something. Take your pick, it's not actually relevant. The point is that we know Team Stark were doing missions, we know that Hazel was in Salem's employ during this time, all you need is them in the same place at the same time, so take your pick. So, arriving to the scene of this incident, or what they're investigating, or at least nearby, Raven sees Hazel. She knows who Hazel is. Hazel is perhaps threatening someone, or just questioning someone, or she thinks he's going to. And remember, Raven is doing the right thing at this time, so to speak. She's on Team Oz. So, she dives in. If Hazel knows info, she needs to know it too, and at the very least, she'll protect people. Raven confronts him. Now, I'm not going to write all the lines of dialogue, but it will essentially play out that Hazel says he doesn't want to hurt her, nobody needs to die today, etc. Raven says she's not going anywhere and you'd better tell her what you know. Just because she's a quote-unquote good guy right now, I don't think Raven ever lost her edge or her bravado. He says he can't do that, and so they has fight. Hazel is really good. Raven is equally really good. Hazel doesn't Hulk out yet, but Raven is seriously putting him on the back foot. He's really good, but he's not plus 17 more years of huntsman killing experience good. He will be when we meet him. So this is a fight, and more importantly, it's a fight in a show, so we get a pause for some more talking. Raven is grandiose, smug, and bragging. It's how she do, even if it's a front. She doesn't show weakness, but she is starting to get worn out here too. She says she knows he works for Salem. She says she's not afraid of him or Salem, and it's just a matter of time before she and Oz squash them once and for all. Now, Hazel didn't know Raven was here on behalf of Oz till now. He just assumed she was a huntsman. Probably, in fact, a minstrel huntsman. It would make sense that she was there investigating whatever happened as well. And if you didn't know, Hazel also has this trigger word that she just said. And that word is Oz. It is Hulk out time now. Then we get fight phase 2, and Raven puts up a great fight and loses. She starts getting wrecked. She is no longer blocking and dodging all of Hazel's shots, they are starting to get through. We're talking proper Hulk out, dust in the arms, and Hazel is going to town. For some biological sake that will make sense in a minute, we'll say he used fire dust here or something, not electricity dust. Just roll with me, alright? We can make it look cinematic as fire, busts off her sword and stuff. Anyway, the point is that Raven loses. She takes a big knock on the chin going through the wall of a shack. She then takes a big mean crash back out into the town square again. Her aura breaks, and she crawls for her dropped sword a few feet away. Hazel walks up and stomps through the blade of her sword, shattering it, and kicking the hilt away so she can't replace it from her scabbard. Raven is down. Hazel, still raging out and furious, uses his toe to roll Raven on her back. He raises his foot above her. Imagery of him stomping through that blade like it were paper are fresh in our minds. He says he's sorry, and just at the last moment as he moves his foot, Raven blurts out, "I'm pregnant." Hazel freezes mid-stomp. Raven is in the most vulnerable position we've ever seen her, as she puts her arms over her stomach, weeping on the ground, and begs him, "Please, I'm pregnant. Please don't, my baby. Please." Hazel looks shocked, fair enough, and then furiously takes a step back. He could never do it now. No way. Raven, in fear and weeping, scoots away until her back is up against the well in the center of town, and she sits there sobbing and shaking with her arms subconsciously over her belly. Hazel pulls his dust crystals from his arm and drops them. He walks over, and Raven cowers a little on his approach. Hazel goes down to one knee and talks about what an awful, disgusting man Oz is, sending not just children to their death every day, but even those yet to be born. Sending a pregnant huntsman into the field is more monstrous than even Salem in his eyes. Raven defends herself and him, saying that he didn't know, and that he's wrong about Oz. Hazel is annoyed then that Raven would possibly be so brainwashed as to head into the field, herself knowing she was pregnant, just for Oz. That's how bad he is. So Hazel reaches a hand out under Raven's chin and makes her look him in the eye. He then proceeds to put the fear of God into her. He tells her that they stand no chance against Salem. She can't even beat him. Salem is immortal. In fact, he's killed Salem himself countless times, and she just comes back. She is an unstoppable force of nature who wields the very will of Grimm in her hands and magics beyond her imagining. He tells her, and he says to look in his eyes and tell him if he's lying or not. Raven is a good read of people, and she sees only honesty. She is terrified, shaking like a scared little girl. Then Hazel drops the nuke, that Ozpin knows all of this, that he sends her and all his huntsmen, all the children, his sister, everybody at your school and all of your friends into a war they cannot win. An enemy he knows is actually unkillable. Again, he holds eye contact with her, so she knows there is absolutely no doubt in his honesty, Then he stands up and he tells her to go home, to abandon this fight, to forget about Ozpin, the lying snake, leave all of this behind, and give your child a good life. With that, Hazel turns away and leaves, leaving Raven alone to stew on this information. Now, what happens from here could go one of two ways. Either Raven returns to Oz and grills him on this and leaves, or simply takes Hazel at his word and leaves. But understand, Raven is not just betrayed and sad. She's furious and scared. In fact, you could say that this whole ordeal has left her stark Raven mad. Woo! Did it! The best pun ever! But anyway, the point is, Hazel showed mercy on her once, but she won't be pregnant forever. So Raven hatches a plan, and the plan is this. Hazel knows who I am, Salem therefore knows who I am. Hazel knows I am pregnant. God forbid Salem knows that I am pregnant, and that I work for Oz. There is a decent chance that they will come looking for her in the future. So, here's the plan. She takes time off from Oz saying she's pregnant. She spends her time trying to convince her brother to leave Stark and come back to the tribe, saying that, they've betrayed their people, they should go back to their roots. She does her best in general to put screws into Team Stark, trying to break them up. Just talking about her being a traitor to her people, and all of this is nonsense, and, Ozpin's a liar, etc. Hoping to keep them out of harm's way in general, but they just rally against her. Unfortunately, Raven's arrogant personality that she's probably had her entire life, that the team has dealt with since they met her, and the initial switch from when she must have admitted their initial reason for coming to Beacon and getting over that. Now she's gone back to it, everyone's just going to think that her true colours have shined through and sort of write it off. But it will cause huge tensions through the team, which Ty has mentioned. But again, it was framed as Raven's values destroying her team, her loyalties, etc. But they think that's to her tribe, whereas she actually had this in mind. Raven, of course, uses the slight comfort of being in Beacon and somewhat safe to deliver her baby. Then the actual plan becomes clear. She rocks up on Ty's doorstep and says, "Here is your baby." She says he'll never see her again, and she vanishes and goes back to her tribe. But now, here's the clarity. She knows Ty is a good man who will look after Yang, and he may be a huntsman, but Yang will surely pin him down to do less dangerous jobs so he can raise her, which works perfectly. That's exactly what happens. So Yang is safe, Ty is safer than he was. She will then go back to the tribe and use her immeasurable skill and power to assert dominance there, and then once she is in position of power and leading it, use it to disappear. So, if you add it up, her daughter is safe, she can check in on her in time to make sure she isn't being targeted, and keep herself low profile, constantly moving with the tribe, making it harder for Salem to find her. Something we know she had plans for since getting the maiden, but it could have therefore been also something she planned for earlier than that. Yes, this means she can't be with her daughter, who she does love, but having contact with Yang puts Yang in more danger, so a severed connection is actually safest. She then stews on her hate, betrayal, depression, and misery for 17 years. We then know what happens from there. This all clears up some stuff. It says how Raven got her info. Well, Hazel would tell her, and he doesn't want unnecessary people dying, especially those being controlled by the likes of Oz, like his sister was. Everything about him says he would do that. It covers Raven's deep fears. If she gets wrecked by Hazel, and someone so much stronger than her says he killed Salem repeatedly and she didn't die, and that puts Salem on a terrifying level for Raven. The betrayal is real in her mind, with what she's seen. And that moment of fear, protecting Yang, wasn't an act. She didn't want to admit it before, but this baby is very real and she cares for it. However, that means for safety, the best choice is to sever ties with her, since if Salem or Hazel come looking for Raven in the future, they should not have a direct link to Yang. It puts Raven abandoning Yang in a much sadder and more realistically understandable context. And, she relies on her bravado, showmanship, and, facade to stay alive. Do that for nearly 20 years, it makes Raven. Now also, Hazel probably would not mention all this to Salem, as it really was inconsequential and he wouldn't want to put a child in danger. But Raven doesn't know that. That also makes essentially what Raven does and her and Yang's relationship pointless, which is even more tragic because she didn't have to do it. So the timeline lines up. It puts Raven at about a flat 40, maybe 41 years old, considering the 9 months to deliver Yang when we meet her. So if you were wondering about those sort of ages, and that seems right for about Crow as well. The timeline lines up, the motivations make sense, the characters are acting right, it's believable, it's pretty spot on, fits nicely. Also, while I'm here, I'll mention that there really isn't any obvious evidence against it. Going back through volumes 4 and 5, Crow has no idea who Tyrion is, fair enough. Raven doesn't know Cinder, Watts, Mercury or Emerald, but no mention of Hazel. Outside of, in fact, Cinder does say Hazel's name once in front of Raven and gets no reaction, but then again, why would Raven react? She knows Hazel works for Salem. When he appears at Haven, Crow is very worried when Hazel rages out. He is surprised, but nothing suggests he should already know about that given the story we told. There's no reason that Raven would have gone into, how Hazel attacks or anything, or that she would even admit to being beaten at all. Also again, while we're at Haven, there's no reaction from Raven either, but she's on his side, so she shouldn't have to worry. And the fact that there isn't a surprise reaction from her might say even more, that she's seen it before perhaps. As for Oz, letting them know about Hazel, it'd be right at the time he begins working against Oz, right when Stark comes up, so to let them in on the fight against Salem, he'd probably share that Hazel exists. No reason for him not to. It's questionable if Oz would know how Hazel fights, since he never attended the school. Therefore, Crow not knowing later isn't a plot hole or something. There's no reason that Oz would bring it up unless he'd directly seen it and thought to warn them about it, which nothing says he would have had to. You could then say, why doesn't Oz make Hazel public enemy number 1? But if you've seen how Oz operates, it's kind of fitting. Now, you can debate whether you think that's a good idea or not, but it does fit Oz's character. Lastly, it's not a big one, but Ironwood mentions Hazel at the end of Volume 7. Now, Hazel got his face put up in Mistral after Haven, sure, but the tower was down, so that info didn't travel to Atlas. Crow and the others do spend significant time at Atlas during 7 before he would have said that, and saying that they told him what happened at Haven and informed him about Hazel is fair. But also, they may not have. They didn't mention Tyrion to him until he actually appeared in Atlas, and they knew he worked for Salem before that. Crow learned that in 4, he didn't pass that on. So you can't assume that they also passed on about Hazel. I'd lean towards they didn't tell Ironwood who Hazel was. Ironwood already knew simply from working with Oz. Hazel is a known operative of Salem, and the inner circle around Oz is aware of that, which Raven was once a part of. The only other thing is that Hazel doesn't react to Raven either when they're at Haven. But again, why would he? It was over 17 years ago, and here she is on Cinder's side when he walks in, so why question it? Hazel is never sent to do anything concerning Raven. She's never mentioned him that we see. He's never mentioned around her except for him passing once by Cinder, and she'd have no reason to react there. Basically, the point of what I'm saying is that there is no absolute proof this is what happened, but there is also no solid evidence anywhere against it. So the timeline works, the characters work, it all fits, it's all logical, and there's nothing that stands out anywhere that says otherwise. I'd say it's a pretty good bet, honestly. But that's all for now. It was a long journey, but if you liked it, please like it. Share it if you think others would too. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and subscribe if you want to see more. Until next time, remember, there may have been a lot of jokes online about the mechanics of how uncomfortable it must have been for Raven to transform into a bird while pregnant, but in all honesty, what you really want to know is, not just if Yang hatched from an egg, but can she provide her own breakfast? But at this point we part ways. My name is Rigger, hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope I did alright.